To Godly, this is the voice of Johnson County, Joco Community Radio.
If you are trying to quit drinking or doing too many drugs, listen to me. You don't know me and we'll never meet. I had a problem like you once. I drank and used to party a little too much till it got out of control and almost ruined my life. I realized I needed help to fix my problem before it totally destroyed me. If you've tried to fix your drinking and drug problem and you know you can't do it alone, you need to call the National Treatment Advisors. They'll immerse you into a 30-day program to replace your old habits with new habits and totally change your life. And if you have PPO private health insurance, the entire program may be covered. Fix your problem right now before it gets any worse. Get clean. Call now and learn more. 877-247-1581. 877-247-1581. 877-247-1581.
Attention all business owners and creative minds. Do you need a unique and personalized touch for your products? Look no further than Romika Laser Engraving and Custom Designs. I'm Ron Phillips, co-owner of Romika Designs. We offer custom laser engraved services for a variety of products, including promotional items and core personal gifts. With state-of-the-art equipment and a team of skilled designers, we can engrave intricate designs on virtually any material. Whether it's a special message, a company logo, or a custom design, Romika Laser Engraving will help you make your mark. And the best part, our prices are affordable and our turnaround time is quick.
I couldn't be happier with the work Romika Laser Engraving did for me. The engraving on my product was precise and exactly what I wanted.
So don't wait any longer to add a personal touch to your products. Call Romika Laser Engraving and Custom Designs today at 817-400-4040 or visit our website at romikadesigns.com. We look forward to helping you make your mark.
Hey travelers, do you want to save money on your next flight? Then pick up the phone and call. That's right, call, because the best prices are not online. They're with SmartFares. See, SmartFares has special deals with the airlines. When they have unsold seats, they use SmartFares to fill them. So you get airline tickets at ridiculously low prices. Our prices are too low to publish online. With the extra money you'll save, you can book another trip or treat yourself to dinner or shopping. So stop searching all of those travel sites to find the lowest price on your next flight. Let one of our SmartFares expert travel agents find ridiculously low prices for you. Call SmartFares today and get the best price on your next flight. Guaranteed. Also, save up to 50% off business and first class tickets.
855-325-1820. 855-325-1820. That's 855-325-1820.
Have you ever met a single person in your life that enjoys paying taxes? No, no one does. If you can't sleep at night because you have a huge problem with the IRS, I've got some free advice for you. This service is strictly limited to individuals that owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes. And if you qualify, we can guarantee that you won't be writing a big fat check to the IRS, or our services cost you nothing. The first 100 people that call today will get a free tax consultation worth $500. Stop worrying about your IRS problem. We can help you, we promise. Call the tax doctor right now. I mean right now, to learn more.
800-240-4587. 800-240-4587. 800-240-4587. That's 800-240-4587.
You're listening to Joco Community Radio.
Good afternoon, Johnson County. Good afternoon, North Texas. Welcome to today's episode of Let Freedom Ring. I'm your host, Jake Wernette. As wonderful as always, it's wonderful to have all of you here with me. I figured I'd start out with an old favorite of mine, the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Something that is not played as much as often anymore. You couldn't see me reacting to it. I was sitting here getting goosebumps, getting riled up. I'm ready to go. Uh, there's just nothing in the world like patriotic music, man. There's nothing that excites the American people. There's nothing that excites the human being like a good rally cry, like a good effort, a good push forth. Uh, there's nothing that gets soldiers ready to perhaps meet their fate while fighting for a great cause than a great speech, a great oration. There's nothing that excites us as American citizens more than a man getting up or a woman getting up and giving a great speech to their citizens, somebody getting on the House or the Senate floor and sitting there willing to filibuster the greatest speech in human history for 18 hours. We often hear the case that words and actions are very different. We must realize that our words mean one thing, but if we don't act in tandem in unison with what we proclaim to be our beliefs, then we are nothing more than sitting ducks, idle decoys for the enemy to ravage. And for too long, I believe the United States has been in a position where our enemies have been in power, where those who do not have our nation's interests, the interests of our kids, the interests of our schools, the interests of our parents over their own. And it's very sad to see the state of affairs in our nation today. And regardless of whether you're a Democrat, regardless of whether you're a Republican, a conservative, an independent, a libertarian, a liberal, this show today is meant for everybody out there, because what I'm going to preach and tell you today is a rallying cry for every single American, that we can come together. There is a point at which we must say that our enemy must not advance. There's a point in every nation's history where they are at the crossroads of whether that nation continues to survive, whether that means it's an empire, some sort of grand scale global country or not. But the choice is ours. The choice is up to us, the American people. Just like it was the choice of the Russians to choose communism or freedom in the Chinese Civil War, whether they chose totalitarianism or freedom. America is very quickly approaching that crossroads. And I believe this election, you will hear it as the most important in our history. They've said that about every election. But I think it doesn't take an academic. It doesn't take somebody with 30 years of political experience to figure out that what we're really seeing is the convergence of a communistic ideology, not even communism, fascism, communism, all of this is thrown into one grand scale category, authoritarianism or freedom, the way that our founders intended it. I'd like to start off with a video real quick, a speech that I'm very prone to loving. And I think this is a speech that every single American needs to hear. And I really want you to share this video. Whoever made it, I'm going to give them credit, of course. But it's called The Man in the Arena. And we're going to play this for a few minutes because this is perhaps one of the most devotional cases of what it means to be an American. To me, Teddy Roosevelt exemplifies this in a very short speech called The Man in the Arena. The difference between acting and simply living idle, living on what we call autopilot. When we see things going wrong, when we see injustices, tyrannies arising in our societies, it is our duty, nay, is our obligation, not only under the doctrines of man, but the ordinance of heaven, that we combat and confront those injustices, that we confront those tyrants. So take a listen to this.
The poorest way to face life is to face it with a sneer. There are many men who feel a kind of twisted pride in cynicism. There are many who confine themselves to criticism of the way others do what they themselves dare not even attempt. There is no more unhealthy being, no man less worthy of respect than he who either really holds or feigns to hold an attitude of sneering disbelief toward all that is great and lofty, whether in achievement or in that noble effort which, even if it fails, comes to second achievement. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again. Because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who, at the best, knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who, at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat.
I think that's a speech that ought to be played in every civics class, in every government class, and every parent ought to show their child when they reach the right age. What Teddy Roosevelt says, that wasn't Teddy Roosevelt speaking, obviously, but what Teddy Roosevelt writes in the progressive age, the Gilded Age of American government. Now, let me take you back to the time and the place of this. Frankly, one that mirrors the world in which we live in at this exact moment. A world where a few large corporations hold great power, in which those who can buy out senators, who can buy out presidencies, are the ones that have the most say. Those who, these big media outlets will tell you everything's okay. While you've got rats being ground up into sausage, you've got legal immigrants, you've got people in inner cities working themselves to death in unhealthy conditions, coming home, getting sick. There's viruses running around in big cities. An utter hellscape. A man by the name of Theodore Roosevelt, a true progressive in the sense of his day, and what many of us has come to see as a great conservative in our day, holds two very different views, it seems, nowadays, especially for us. But what he says, I believe, unites all Americans. Essentially, Teddy Roosevelt writes this decently long speech. It's about 2.5 minutes. If you really go in here to read it, he goes time after time using synonyms. It's not the critic who counts. It's not the one who points out the flaws, the shortcomings of other people. It's not the person who sits around and says, I wish things would be better. It's not the person who sits on their couch and watches the nightly news and says, gee, I sure wish our country was in a better place. What Teddy Roosevelt says is it's the man who fights, the man who experiences war, the man who is out acting on the betterness of his society. It's not the man who sits in the suburbs. It's the man in the cities working. It's the man in the schoolhouse fighting for the curriculum, fighting for good education. It's the people that go to work. It's the people that stand up and act, go to their city council meetings. It's the people that get involved that matter. Now, we could get into a whole debate over the equality of human insight here, but I'm going to give you my frank and my earnest opinion here, even if it catches me a little flack. I could give two craps how somebody thinks I could have done my life better. I could give two craps about whether somebody thinks I should have won or I should have lost when I ran for city council. I could give two bananas somebody coming up to me and saying, you don't have enough experience. You're not old enough to do this. I think that's what a lot of folks here is all of these great criticisms. And Teddy Roosevelt says, you know what? It's not the person that's sitting there telling you could have done something different that counts. It's the person who is out working through sweat, through blood, through hellfire and brimstone if it comes down on them. That is the person who will better their country. And I think for too long, the American people, left and right, have been lied to by this system. This whole idea that we as American citizens just don't have the time to see what's going on in our schools. We don't have the time to get involved. We don't have this. We don't have that. Our founders made time. Our founders fought when there was no other choice. I'm not somebody to not criticize my own generation. I have my privileges, and that's not even coming from a liberal prerogative when I say that. I'm very privileged to live in a country where I haven't had to go off and die in a war just yet. I'm blessed. I am honored to live in a country that I don't really have to do a whole lot except go to work, go to school, my same daily routine. I'm very blessed to live in this land where I have the freedom to sit down and watch a movie while there are men and women suffering abroad for my life, for my freedoms. But I think that's where a lot of us tend to draw the line. Somebody else is doing it. It's not my time. I don't have to step up. Somebody better than me will do it. Maybe there's not somebody better than you. Think about that. What if you are the person that millions of people are relying on to step up, to show up, to do the right thing? I've always had this perspective of my own that I might not be the best man for the job. I'm not a perfect person. I've done things wrong in my life. But we as American citizens are obligated to stand up and act. I'll give you a little parallel here. There are two great arguments in American civilization today, and that is whether to make voting more accessible, easier on everybody, or to maintain this image of security at the least, and at the greatest extent, prevent election fraud by having everybody go to the voter's booth. Now, I'm not going to pick a side here, but I want you to see where I'm coming from on this. A person who values their country is going to show up to vote. A person who cares about the future and the fate of this great land of ours is going by any means show up to the polls. Now, I'm not speaking out against any particular group of people I want to make that very clear. But I care enough. I'm going to leave work for an hour if it takes me that long to go vote. I'm going to leave school in the middle of class if I have to go vote. Just like if it came down to it, I would take up arms, if necessary, to protect and defend my freedoms and those of my countrymen. And I hope that it never comes to that in this great country, because America is too good for that. I don't know how many people have heard of the term litmus test, but this is exactly what I'm telling you. A litmus test is essentially the willingness of the human being to participate in a system shows the worth of that individual's contributions. And I'm giving you my own lingo here. But what it really boils down to is those who are going to show up hold a stake in this country because they believe that by God, by providence, by sheer evolution, that they have been given a country that is worth serving, that is worth saving. Those people will go and show up to vote. Meanwhile, those who may not have an exception, those who might be able to show up but just don't want to take the time to, are going to fight tooth and nail. Just send the ballot to my home. Just let me do this. Just let me do that. I see this litmus test every day at the supermarket when I go to work. There's a buggy corral 2 steps away and somebody leaves it in the parking lot. In my inference, and I would argue that in Teddy Roosevelt's day as well, voting was very different. People showed up. People waited in long lines. Why? Because there was a man who they saw that was worth giving a chance to that could fix their country, that could help a broken system, unite a broken people. Now, this is very different than in a dictatorship where, you're kind of forced to show up, or in Russia where you have one candidate the whole time. But the test is becoming ever more clear in our society today. America's in a state of polarization where we are forced between being one side or being on the other. I want to give you a little perspective from my generation, from my own age group. I am pro-union. That might not be a popular conservative thing. But seeing the way that some of these companies are controlling the government, are buying out our senators and stuff like that, they don't speak for the common worker. I think it's essential that we have that apparatus. The test of capitalism is not only being able to provide for yourself, but being able to bring up the standard of your own country. A true capitalist not only seeks individualism and private ownership, but also to contribute, to innovate, to inspire. Without that crucial factor, we have a crucial lapse that leads exactly to where we are today. A few companies, corporations, greedy people controlling the market and shutting out small businesses that could make a product way better, that employ thousands of times more Americans than some of these large corporations. Teddy Roosevelt was pro-union, but is seen by Republicans as probably one of the most staunchly great conservatives of his day. President Eisenhower favored keeping Social Security and stuff intact because he believed that a country with as many resources as ours should take care of our elders that can't take care of themselves. Eisenhower was the architect of the Nazi defeat, a man who single-handedly kept us from the brink of nuclear warfare. And that legacy, of course, went on to John F. Kennedy. 2 men, opposite parties, believing most of the same thing. Why? Because they were Americans first. There was no allegiance to the Democrats, who had a history of racist segregation in the South, or the Republicans, who were seen by some folks in the country as enemies. They were still seen as the party, that created, the Great Depression. Even in the midst of great political rivalries, People stood together on the ground that was the American government, the American citizen. I think one thing that's thrown around too many times these days is that revolution means violence. There have been a lot of revolutions in human history that were not violent. The revolution that took place in Europe during the Great Schism, or shall we call it the Reformation, where Martin Luther successfully seceded from the Catholic Church because what he saw in some cases was wrong. The revolution of the Enlightenment, the ideas of freedom, individualism, the obligation for Christians to stand up to tyrants. That Enlightenment led to the American Revolution, whose writings like John Locke and Thomas Paine, who were inspired by great Athenians, by great Romans, by great Enlightenment thinkers in Europe, had brought the text to the United States and said it's time for action. It was very easy for men like Nathan Hale or Patrick Henry to sit by. Patrick Henry was, I believe, a representative from the state of Virginia who would be elected several times to the Continental Congress. And when the Olive Branch petition failed, when it was evident that the British government would no longer tolerate the American citizens as loyal British subjects, as people that would bend over and backwards for British rule without representation, regardless of where you stand in the equilibrium of ideology, regardless of what colony you were from, everybody saw that at stake. And rather than sitting back and saying, we'll vote for this, we'll vote for that, Patrick Henry got up on the House floor in the Continental Congress and said, I know not what course other men may take. Give me liberty or give me death. Several years later in the Revolution, a man by the name of Nathan Hale, who was a Continental spy for George Washington's army, was caught by British officers passing intelligence on to Washington. And they took Nathan Hale to the center of town and threw a rope over the highest branch, the most sturdy, high branch that they could find in the middle of town, and they put one end around his neck. And he said, I regret that I have but one life to give for my country. The British would later write, this is the most gentlemanly death we have ever witnessed. The most honorable death that we've seen in battle. And these are guys who saw 20, 30 battles across Europe probably. My point in the first segment is this. It's one thing for us to sit down. It's one thing for us to criticize everybody else. And it's another thing to get out. It's another thing to get active. It's another thing to get out and fight for your country. Not for your Republican Party, not for your Democrat Party. There are things still that we can see eye to eye on. And there are two sides who see the same coin by two different names. The establishment and what the socialists might call the elites, the capitalists, the bureaucratic class. This is not a communist perspective, I assure you. We both see the trial and the tribulation in our country today being caused by failed policy, ignorant people, and people who no longer serve the interests of this American nation and our people. And it's time to get up. Here in the next segment, we're going to discuss exactly why our youth have been lied to and fed a lie on this for generations. Stick with us.
Why have thousands of aspiring authors teamed up with Christian Faith Publishing to publish their book? Because Christian Faith Publishing is an author-friendly publisher who understands that your labor is more than just a book. We provide authors freedom and flexibility throughout the publishing process, professional book editing, award-winning design, and some of the highest royalty structures in the publishing industry. And as always, you will retain 100% of the rights to your book.
I was looking to find a company that I could trust, one that assisted in the editing process completely.
The most important qualities that I was looking for was a publisher who was honest and upfront, no hidden costs or fees, and owning the rights to my own work.
Christian Faith Publishing will publish, market, and sell your books in all major bookstores, online booksellers, as well as specialty Christian bookstores. Call for your free author submission kit.
800-978-4812. 800-978-4812. 800-978-4812. That's 800-978-4812.
Here's important new information from the Diabetes Solution Center for you, a family member, or a loved one suffering with diabetes. If you have lost your provider, or if you need a provider for diabetic supplies, you may qualify to receive your diabetic testing supplies now with little or no out-of-pocket cost, regardless of your age. All you need is Medicare or private insurance to be potentially eligible. Call the Diabetes Solution Center right now for details. Just takes a couple of minutes. Our friendly, knowledgeable agents will give you free, no-obligation information, handle all the insurance paperwork, and make sure your supplies are delivered directly to your door for free.
Call U.S. Medical Supply 24 hours a day. 800-597-9323. 800-597-9323. 800-597-9323. Call right now. 800-597-9323.
You're listening to Joco Community Radio.
Welcome back, North Texas, to today's episode of Let Freedom Ring. I'm your host, Jake Wernette. As always, I want to thank you for tuning in today. For those who are staying after from the first segment, God bless you. Thank you very much. We appreciate every person that we get on this show, because it's not without you, the American people, that we can enrich, fulfill, and enlighten the lives and minds of our fellow citizens. So we thank you for that. Those who are just tuning in, those who are just joining us, thank you for making us your trusted show for the day. Before we get into it, I'd like to say that NTX Radio is a radio and podcast collective proudly serving all of North Texas. We can be heard all over the world on the TuneIn Radio Network and on the NTX Radio app on Android, Apple CarPlay, or just ask Alexa to play NTX Radio. Check out our lineup and more at ntxradio.com. We thank our valued partners in helping us amplify the voices of North Texas. Be sure to connect with Todd Hurd and Associates, attorneys at law, for all of your civil law needs at texasattorneylaw.com. If you're processing credit cards, join the Swipe Nation today and save on processing fees at swipenationusa.com. Locally owned and operated. The holidays are just around the corner. Be sure to shop the Tiffy.com for Tiffy sleeves and scarves. When you're ready to deliver the right message to the right people at the right time, email Tiffany at t.hurd@ntxradio.com for advertising rates. So we ended off the first segment, kind of went on a little bit longer than I thought, but essentially, we live in a society that a lot of people on the right and the left can agree has become corrupt, has become inefficient, has become self-serving. Now, this system was not designed this way, but it has been built this way by corrupt politicians, by people who tell you this is the best we can do, by people who are envious, people who are greedy. I'm not going to take up too much time explaining that. I want to show you something that it took me till now, and this is a 50-year-old movie that I grew up watching on VHS tapes. I'm old enough to remember VHS tapes, folks. It was the 1973 version of Robin Hood by Disney. Now, I'm not going to play the whole movie here, but I urge you to go out and buy it on DVD. Save it for the time that you are wanting your kids to watch it. And I want to set out a bit of a learning plan here. Buy the movie on DVD, buy the movie, stream it, however you can get it. I prefer DVDs because, technology might shut down, but at least you've got a physical archive of it when push comes to shove, when worse comes to to pass. But sit down with your kids one time, watch it with them, and explain this coming perspective to them. I'm going to play some clips of it, and we might stop it here and there, but I want to show you some. I'm going to explain something to you that you might have never thought of. I'm sure boomers, I'm sure a lot of folks grew up watching this same movie that I did. I'm going to show you some clips, and we're going to see together what the real narrative here is. This is the song.
Man, oh man, that Prince John sure made good his threat. And his helpless subjects paid dearly for his humiliation, believe me. Taxes, taxes, taxes. Why, he taxed the heart and soul out of the poor people of Nottingham. If you couldn't pay your taxes, you went to jail. Yep, I'm in here too. Nottingham was in deep trouble. Every town has its ups and downs. Some towns' ups outnumber the downs, but not in Nottingham. I'm inclined to believe if we weren't so down, we'd up and leave. We'd up and fly if we had wings for flying. Can't you see the tears we're crying? Can't there be some happiness for me? Not in Nottingham.
Friar Tuck, I don't think anyone is coming.
You're right, Sexton, but maybe the sound of this church bell will bring those poor people some comfort. We must do what we can to keep their hopes alive.
Now, that's one clip. Here's another one. Take a watch this. And let's see if we can figure out where this comes into play with modern politics. Because I believe it does.
But sire, it's a big hit. The whole village is singing it.
Oh, they are they? Well, they'll be singing a different tune. Double the taxes, triple the taxes. Squeeze every last drop out of those insolent musical peasants.
Now, this show, you might be sitting here thinking, well, Jake, I don't know why you're playing a 50-year-old animated cartoon. Let's look at some parallels here, because I really believe that movie is misinterpreted to every American child who had ever watched it. There is this old saying, Robin Hood robs the rich to feed the poor. a very socialistic aspect, a very socialistic, almost Marxian hero. A common man steps up, takes on the capitalists, the bureaucrats, the elite class, who really ends up being small town business owners and managerial types and some middlemen. That is what we are taught from this movie. That is what we're told to believe from this movie. I have a different perspective, however, that Robin Hood does not represent a socialist hero, a Marxian struggle, like our children grow up to believe in this show, and I myself had believed for a very long time. I believe that this exemplifies a greater threat: government overreach, government taxation without representation, the idea of a government having the power to squeeze every last ounce of strength from its citizens, a government that decries people being able to defend themselves, a police state, a government that bloats itself on the riches of the bowers of paradise, as Thomas Paine would say. The palaces of kings are built on the bowers of paradise, the backs of the citizens. A government that closes down its church because that church either refuses to pay or stands up. Now, if you've seen this movie like me, you've seen all of this in a different light until now. The 1973 movie Robin Hood might have a really good soundtrack. Roger Miller, all these folks might have had some really awesome actors, man. Might have been animated fantastically. Oh, rob the rich to feed the poor. That's a very simple way to put it. Except if you live in a country like ours, we should learn to see it from a different perspective. Now, the whole story goes, and I'm going to lay out 4 really simple points for you here. And we're going to analyze how correct that statement, rob the rich to feed the poor, really is. So, in the beginning, King Richard goes off to fight in the Crusades. He's practically not present in the whole movie until the end. Then you get the really cheesy line, I have an outlaw for an in-law, this and that. But you have King Richard who goes off to fight in the Crusades, and Prince John essentially usurps the throne. Now, King Richard is still king by monarchical law in the movie. Prince John steps up and takes over the throne. Now, there's no parliament. There's nothing like that. And by all means, this is England on a very small scale. But you already have this threat laid out in the movie of usurpation of authority. Now, in America's terms, I'm going to lay this out simply here: stolen elections. You have the image, at least I'm not giving you anything to say, I have evidence of this or that, but stick with the idea here with me for a second. The idea of stolen elections, the idea of somebody putting themselves on the throne. This could be the deep state. This could be whoever's been in charge 40% of the time when Joe Biden's left. It could be the people that write the teleprompters. It could be the people that are still writing the teleprompters for Vice President Harris when she went to a town hall and she's supposed to have her own responses to the citizens to show what an experienced public servant she really is. On the Republican side, this could be the establishment politicians like Mitch McConnell and some other folks who would bend over backwards for these big spending bills, stuff that the Republican Party itself doesn't even believe in, so to speak. But already in the 1973 movie Robin Hood, you see the threat of tyrannical government coming through an unrecognized stealing of the throne. In our nation, hijacking of the electoral process, buying elections, finding votes, dumping votes in. We go further into the movie and it becomes evidently more clear that Prince John is getting rich off of the taxes from the commoners. Man, if Prince John really embodies the deep state, really makes me wonder why our national budget has tripled here in just the last 20 years. Spent another $10.5 trillion over the course of these last few years in stimulus. I wonder where that went. Perhaps lining the pockets of old Prince John? Stick with me on that. We go on to show, as the Rooster did in jail, all these poor regular citizens that wound up in jail for disobeying the tyrant Prince John. People got no food, no water. They're sitting there drinking rain. They're sitting there eating whatever has fallen out of their clothes. Oh gosh, we have that today in a representative system. People being taxed so much that they can't pay it, and then they get their house taken. They get all this stuff taken from them. Gee, that sure doesn't sound like the American dream that any of us grew up hearing about. Not only that, but taxing the church, taking the church's money, telling the church what it can and can't do. That is the funny part we get into looking at. See, the sheriff of Nottingham, if you've seen the movie, if you saw the clips just now, I believe now over just exemplifying a sheriff represents an entire police state, enforcing the will of the bureaus, enforcing the will of the deep state, enforcing the will of the federal government, taking the hammer down on the citizens of this country. Just like the FBI that raided Catholics' homes when they went to school board meetings. The same Department of Defense that labeled school board parents as national threats, as Christians, as domestic terrorists, that went after pro-lifers from rallies and followed them home. The ones that shut down their bank accounts when they stood up and said something. The ones that had their social medias censored. The ones that were harassed and raided. Now, I don't know if you're a big fan of Roger Stone. I'm not going to make a formal opinion of the guy. He's just going to be an example here. Showing up with machine guns and guns in the middle of the night, raiding their homes in front of their kids and wives, pointing the guns at daddy's head. Boy, Nottingham sure is starting to look like the United States today. We get on to the funny part here. The fourth thing I will show you, just what state power can do when people value what their government tells them over their religion, their own faith, their own individualism. Old sheriff, police state walks in to the church in this movie, takes the money out of the poor box, and rather than submitting, the friar, the pastor, the priest, whatever, denomination you want to call this guy, stands up and says, you can't do that. Gets into a whole fight with the sheriff, ends up being drug off to jail. The church is closed. Now, let's look at what happened during COVID-19. Fact check me if you want to. It really did happen. Now, there wasn't any sort of civil ordinance that came out that said you should close your churches. You should mandate closing churches. Now, this is how they overstep the whole First Amendment thing so they don't get sued. They say, well, you have to close down all these big gatherings, all this, all that. And then, just like in the movie 1973 Robin Hood by Disney, we don't see the sheriff come in and say, Prince John has an ordinance for your arrest. He's got an ordinance for me to close your church. He says you have to pay taxes. He walks into the church, and the priest or the father, the friar, says you can't do that. And takes the friar off to jail. The sure is starting to look like. And here's the thing. It was real funny to me looking back that we closed all our churches because the government put into fear-mongering, said, you should really do what we advise. You should really do what we warn you to do. It's not a law. And then they bring out the goons. They bring out the squad. They bring out the Gestapo, the Schutzstaffel. They bring out the KGB, the Einsatzgruppen, the secret police. And they say, oh, it looks like you're having big gatherings, church. Close your doors unless you want to get arrested. Oh, you're out here surfing on a public beach where nobody here is. Welcome to the slammer. Last time I checked, a warning, even a mandate, is not a law. So now we get into this whole civil dialogue about what it means to shut down private property, businesses, and churches. Not given, you could just tell me, well, Jake, this is just a 1973 film, a movie, rob the rich to feed the poor. Well, here's two things, folks. I didn't see Robin Hood in this movie feeding the poor people, and I didn't see him robbing any rich people. How come in every one of these stories that I've ever heard, he goes after the monarch, he goes after a tyrant, he goes after the government? Because the government is overstepping its boundaries, endangering its citizens, taking from its citizens, ravaging its citizens, eating its citizens, so to speak, putting them in a court system, putting a police state to patrol the beat, to make sure that things all go according to plan, even if it's not a law, even if the king himself hasn't delegated it. I believe that Robin Hood has been mistaught to our youth, and I think it's time that we took the story and explained it a little bit clearer to our young people. So if you're a parent, here's how I'm going to advise this. And, you might be saying, well, Jake, you've got no kids. You should be the last one to speak on this issue. Someday I will have kids, God willing. And someday I will have to teach those kids something. And this is the story that I'm going to teach them. And we're going to go over it just like this. So I'm sitting here watching the movie, and the kid says, what's going on? Well, if your kid is little, you say, well, Prince John wasn't really the king. He kind of stole that from his friend, King Richard. And Prince John was bullying everybody else and, got another tough kid to bully people if they didn't do what he said. And he stole people's lunch money and he beat them up if they didn't give it to him. And they got rid of everybody else's stuff. That's one way to put it. If your kid's like me, or, maybe a little bit younger, I should say, you might say it like this. Well, let's sit down and watch this movie. Your kid might be saying, I don't really want to watch this stupid movie. But, if they're willing to listen, here's how we should reteach Robin Hood to our younger people. You say, well, Prince John is an example of tyranny, of what happens when a government oversteps its boundaries. Now, this government can take people's things away. It can lock them up in jail with or without any evidence. The government can come after your home, your business. The government can tell you to close your churches up, and they have the police enforce that for them. Now, you don't want to instill, some sort of disrespect for law enforcement. So you say, the government uses its minions to enforce things. Now, that is the story that I believe Robin Hood is about now. But it's real easy, and that's why it's so believable, is it's very easy for us to say rob the rich to feed the poor. It takes a lot more words sometimes to explain the real meaning behind things. And the problem nowadays is not that people don't care, it's that they just can't listen. There's a difference between wanting to and needing to. And I think we need to listen at this point. I think we need to see where we're at. The problem with American culture today is we've been dumbed down to listen to these 30-second sound bites. We're sitting here with delayed gratification, looking at everything that everybody's liked of ours, scrolling through TikTok. We're learning our civics from whatever tweet is put out by the federal government. We're learning our civics from the fact checkers on TV and all this other stuff. Who do you think they donate to? Who do you think owns those things? The same folks that are in power, the same elites that are bankrolling the deep state, that are lining the politicians' pockets. The same people, the snake that is enabling Prince John to take the wealth of the masses, to squeeze the life force out of the peasants. This is the story that Americans need to be taught. Because it's not about rich people. Rich people aren't your enemy. Corrupt politicians are. The people in Washington who mandate things down the chain with no legal authority are. The deep state who controls the actions of your government, who are unelected officials, are the enemy. The communists who are infiltrating your colleges and your public schools through Manchurian organizations are. The people who tell you should have done things differently. Oh, Sue, you really shouldn't have gone to that rally. Gee, that guy was a threat to democracy. He really shouldn't have run again. People wouldn't be trying to kill him. Gee, John, you really shouldn't have run for city council. You really don't have any government experience. Gee, Rob, you shouldn't have volunteered in that campaign. Don't you know that there's better things you can waste your time on? I'm going to tell you something that took me a while to figure out, and it's how to have some thick skin. I got called all sorts of BS when I ran for city council. I got called an extremist. I got called, a theocrat. I got called, a white supremacist, all this other stuff. And let me tell you something. I don't have a darn racist bone in my body. But what I can't stand are people who are racist, who say other people are racist because they want the minorities under the foot of the government. They would rather keep them dependent on handouts instead of helping them get their own businesses. They would rather have them not have fathers in the home by subsidizing marriage to the state and lock all those poor men up for victimless crimes. See, our problem in America is not one side or the other. It's people who sit here and allow this to happen. And it's time it got put a stop to. God bless you. God bless the United States of America. May the blood of Christ wash over this government. We desperately need it. And as always, I would rather be dead than red.
From Burleson to Johnson County, Joco Community Radio.